First, they had the XV-3 Lab, then the promising XV-15, and then the controversial V-22. And now, after almost 70 years of work, Bell created a tiltrotor capable of finally, truly conquering the skies and revolutionizing the rotary wing strategy. Hello aviators, Sky here, and I present to you the V-280 Valor. The beginning of the 21st century for the United States became the era of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, in which helicopters played a huge role, showing two trends. Firstly, these helicopters, despite all their merits, no longer always met the requirements of the military. Secondly, such active service depleted resources, which means that a large amount of equipment will have to be removed from service in the near future. The idea of creating a future replacement for them seemed incredibly large-scale, because they wanted to replace the Black Hawk, Apache, Chinook, and Kiowa, the backbone of the fleet, one more iconic than the other. By 2009, the idea was called FVL, Future Vertical Lift Program, and its immediate implementation was to be a replacement for the UH-60. The greatest ambitions were in speed and range, nearly 250 knots and 1,730 miles. Much more than the old helicopters, and this is not counting a bunch of other technical and functional requirements. A difficult task. But winning the tender to replace the UH-60, one of the most popular helicopters in the world, the number of which is in the thousands, promised epic contracts, huge money, and jobs for decades to come. Bell, being one of the largest players, naturally could not ignore this. In addition, they already had an ace in the hole: tiltrotors. Back in the 1950s, Bell created the first fully operational device of this type, the XV-3. In the 1970s, they tested the XV-15 prototype, and later developed the concept into a production model, creating the V-22. Osprey turned out to be a controversial machine. The tiltrotor design freed it from the curse of helicopters, the speed limit, which made it very fast and long range. But this success also had a price. The service was accompanied by a large number of incidents and disasters, which gave it the Marine killer reputation. In addition, it turned out to be very expensive to produce and operate. These factors limited supplies. About 400 units is not so much. Bell had to create a new tiltrotor, but rid it of the shortcomings of its predecessor. It must be reliable and safe, and just as importantly, more cheap. It was about creating a mass medium transport, so it could not afford to cost like a jet fighter. Here I must immediately emphasize, the new machine is not a successor to the V-22 and will not replace it. The Osprey was created to extend the capabilities of heavier helicopters and replaced machines such as the CH-46 Sea Knight. This is a fairly large vehicle. The new tiltrotor should replace lighter helicopters, so it is a step below. At the same time, no one lowered the performance bar. Capacity up to 12 soldiers excluding crew, range 2100 miles, cruising speed 280 knots, which is why it received the V-280 index. A little later, the name was added: Valor. In 2013, the project reached the stage of creating a demonstrator. It was then that the great race began. The Bell V-280 Valor tiltrotor took to the track with the high-speed Sikorsky-Boeing helicopter, SB-1 Defiant. In 2014, a full-size mock-up was presented, accompanied by vivid descriptions of the future machine. The V-280 had much greater speeds and ranges than the UH-60, which radically expanded its combat capabilities. On the other hand, the emphasis was made on the helicopter performance, convenience in landing, hovering, maneuvering at low speeds, and so on. Everyone could assess the speed capabilities from the experience of the V-22 service, but many had doubts whether the Valor, with its configuration and dimensions, could handle, for example, a quick landing operation in cramped urban conditions. Bell needed to prove that their brainchild would not fail. A full prototype was assembled in 2017 at the company's plant in Amarillo, Texas, and the Valor made its first test flight at the end of the year. They began to master horizontal flights already in 2018, tilting the rotors forward more and more with each flight. In May 2018, it finally turned the rotors completely horizontal and accelerated to 190 knots. Just so you understand, the maximum speed of the AH-64 Apache is about 160 knots. Subsequent tests showed very good performance in rate of climb, acceleration, and maneuvering. The maximum speed soon reached 305 knots, 565 kilometers per hour. It is now pointless to compare this with helicopters. Let's take a closer look. At first glance, the V-280 is a bizarre mixture of the UH-60 and the V-22. The simplicity of the design immediately catches your eye, no particularly complex shapes. This is most noticeable on the wing, which is even a bit boring. It looks like it was taken from a piston Cessna plane. On each trailing edge, similar to the V-22, there is a pair of large flaperons. The purpose of such minimalism is not only pure aerodynamics, but also to reduce the cost of production and operation. At the same time, they did not save radically. Composites are used very wildly, which should improve aerodynamics and reduce weight. Maybe even too wildly. Given the service conditions, it is unclear how repairable all this carbon beauty is if a stone, debris, or a bullet flies into it. The empennage has style, a hefty V-shaped tail made up with a pair of inclined fins, acting as both elevators and rudders. The landing gear is tricycle, with two single-wheel legs at the front and one double-wheel leg under the base of the tail, something similar to the landing gear of the SH-60 Seahawk. Given the flight speed, the landing gear of course was made retractable. The length of the V-280 is 15.4 meters. Height is 7 meters, which, although not critical, is higher than the UH-60. But the wingspan with rotors is 24.9 meters, which is a lot. From tip to tip of the propellers, it's like a super stallion. This is not good, because it is trying to fit into the class of medium helicopters and cannot afford excessive dimensions. There are ideas to equip it with folding propellers and a rotating wing, like the V-22, but this would complicate the design. The mass of the tiltrotor should be 14 tons, heavier than the Black Hawk almost by half, but lighter than the V-22, which exceeds 20 tons. You also need to keep in mind the nuances of takeoff. The Osprey can tilt the propeller slightly forward and perform a short takeoff with a maximum weight of 25 tons. The parameters of the V-280 in this case are still unclear. In terms of cockpit layout and glazing, the V-280 looks like the UH-60, but larger. The cockpit is designed for two pilots and is equipped with a modern interface. The control system is fly-by-wire. Now for the interesting part. The desire to equip their machine with the most advanced systems led Bell to interesting solutions. There are plans in the future to replace the current dashboard with one hefty touchscreen display that shows any necessary information. There should be no problem with information either. Valor received the PDAS, Pilotage Distributed Aperture Sensor System, an analog of the DAS system installed in the F-35. This is a group of different types of sensors scattered all over the surface of the machine, which by transmitting data to the onboard computer, form the pilot's image of the surrounding environment, target indication, infrared spectrum, night vision, synthetic vision, and so on. Very useful for a machine that will constantly be used in the thick of battle. Of course, the question of the risk of failures arises, but here the engineers reassure us that this display is not a solid monitor, but an assembly of many autonomous screens, which means in theory that even if you cut off half of this TV, the other half will work. The crew consists of 4 people, 2 pilots and 2 crew chiefs/gunners, plus 12 soldiers. The cabin receives several rectangular windows on both sides, as well as hefty sliding doors. The wing, when the tiltrotor is located on the ground, rises at a height of about 2.1 meters and should not interfere with the landing. It is possible to transport cargo on an external sling. The V-280 should be able to lift the M777 howitzer, which is approximately 4.5 tons. In terms of weapons, the Valor did not rush into radicalism and made decisions most of which we have already seen. These are first of all machine guns installed in the cabin, the M240, M134, and GAU-19, as well as the suspension of various missiles like the Hellfire. The V-280 is propelled into the sky by a pair of large, three-bladed rotors installed on wingtips that rotate 90 degrees. In a vertical position, they act like the main rotors of a helicopter, and when transferred to a horizontal position, they start pulling, like those of a turboprop aircraft. The general concept is the same as that of the Osprey. And now, the differences. With the V-22, the engine, transmission, rotors, and everything else inside the single-engine nacelle turn together. It looks elegant, but in practice it turns out to be complex and not very reliable. On the V-280, Bell decided to use a different solution. Now most of the power plant, the engine, and part of the related systems are fixed inside a stationary engine nacelle. Only a small section with propellers can be rotated. In horizontal flight, it all looks like a single hole, but in vertical flight, the rotors are directed upwards, slightly exposing the mechanisms, and from above, part of the fairing rises, creating a small slope. This slightly impedes the aerodynamics, but at the same time simplifies the design. It is ironic that Boeing proposed exactly this design back in the 1970s with their Model 222. But then everyone wanted the best performance, and the winner was the Bell project, the future XV-15, which later became the progenitor of the V-22. The V-280 prototype was equipped with the 5,000 horsepower General Electric T64 turboshaft engine. The T64 is a time-tested motor installed on various heavy vehicles and is quite suitable for a demonstrator. It is planned to install the Rolls-Royce T406 engines on production machines. Yes, this is the same engine as that of the V-22. Unification and increased supplies will also reduce costs of both machines. At the same time, power should be increased to as much as 7,000 horsepower. It's interesting to see how much power the Valor needs. The V-22 power plant is less powerful, despite the tiltrotor itself being heavier. The epic tender was completed at the end of 2022. The great race between the V-280 Valor and the SB-1 Defiant ended in victory for Bell's brainchild. This choice caused outrage from the losers, as well as a lot of controversy in the industry. Many have stated that the Defiant has the best performance from a helicopter perspective, in size and maneuverability at low speeds. But Sikorsky's problem was that in terms of top speed and range, their helicopter did not achieve the required performance. Perhaps in the future they would have solved these problems, but the tender was at the final stage, and the military did not want to wait, especially since the V-280 already meets the given requirements. Bell themselves are making a huge bet on the Valor. Even before winning the tender, the V-280 was considered as a base for other vehicles. For example, the company is looking at another side of the FVL program, searching for a replacement for the AH-64 attack helicopter. Making modifications, strengthening the armor, installing missiles and cannons, and voila! Creators of the Defiant also proposed such a solution. It is difficult to say what kind of attack vehicle the V-280 will end up being, just as it is difficult to say whether the Apache needs to be replaced at all right now. The opinion of the military was also divided. While the Marines seem curious about this idea, the Army would clearly prefer to receive a specialized machine rather than a modification. Another idea that had been in the air for a long time was the creation of a civilian version. However, over time, this idea was abandoned, deciding to leave the commercial market for the AW609. Which, although now a project of the Italian Leonardo, still has a very strong connection with Bell. Presumably, the Valor will cost about $40 to $50 million, which, to put it mildly, is not cheap, although of course better than the Osprey, the price tag of which is already at the level of the F-35 fighters. Will the Valor replace the Black Hawk? No. Okay, it will replace it, but it will be a very slow process. The V-280 will be actively supplied to the military, but these are unlikely to be truly stunning numbers. There are thousands of Black Hawks in the fleets of the US Armed Forces and other countries, and they will serve for a very long time. And this is nothing new. The UH-60 itself was created to replace the UH-1, but relatives of the Huey are still flying, and quite actively, and they have been replacing them for more than 40 years. We'll see what awaits the Valor in the future. Fortunately, the wait won't be long. I'm looking forward to your opinions in the comments, as well as likes and subscriptions. And if you want to watch the videos early, see some exclusive behind-the-scenes content, or just support the channel, consider joining our Patreon community. Fast flights, aviation fans, and soft landings to you.